So our recording has begun. Again, thank you. I wanted to remind you all as we begin this event, you are agreeing to uphold our UC San Diego's principles community, and we want to keep our community free of any forms of discrimination and harassment. So there is going to be plenty of opportunity for you to participate, and you'll be able to do that supported through the Q&A and the chat. As we begin our program, this Fireside Chat with Dr. Raquel Martin, we want to start off with a land acknowledgement. Even though we are in a virtual space, we would still like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we occupy. The UC San Diego community holds great respect for the land and the original people of the area where our campus is located. The university is built on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. And today, the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. We acknowledge their tremendous contributions to our region, and we thank them for their stewardship. So again, there is a recording of today's presentation, and we have also enabled closed captioning. So if you would like, please make sure to turn that on at the bottom of your screen. And in today's presentation, this Fireside Chat with Dr. Raquel Martin, we ask that you use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. We have reserved time at the end of the presentations for questions from our participants. The chat feature is turned off, but when you are submitting questions and you feel comfortable in doing so, please add an asterisk next to the question if you identify as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. We'll use a progressive stacking technique during the Q&A session so that we allow for those voices to be heard. In our meeting today, again, my name is Rachel Almodovar. I am at the UC San Diego Library, and I am here with another committee member of the Library Diversity and Inclusion Committee, Latrice Goodson. We are going to be your co-hosts, but we also have lots of folks that are helping out as producers. So Leah Friedman and Jen Dandel are also helping out with as producers during this meeting. Also, Jen Cormier is our events coordinator and is helping out with all of those technical duties. If you do have a question, feel free to chat, to send a message in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to be able to support you so you can participate. So that is my introduction. Now I get to turn this over to Latrice Goodson so that she can introduce Dr. Martin.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation. And thank you so much to Dr. Martin for joining us today. I took a chance and sort of reached out to her and just elated that she agreed to join us today, just to have a very important conversation. I'm sure it will prove to be an incredible conversation because most change begins with great conversation. So I would just like to read her bio for you, just so you know just what illustrious company we are in. Dr. Martin is a licensed clinical psychologist, assistant professor, and research scientist that holds her Ph.D. in medical and clinical psychology. Dr. Martin specializes in racism-related stress, racial identity development, and anti-racist and anti-oppressive care. Dr. Martin is passionate about mental health education, activism, and critical consciousness. As a practicing psychologist, Dr. Martin works directly with patients to help them identify and resolve emotions, beliefs, and disparities, racial identity, and trauma-based interventions. Finally, as a professor, Dr. Martin mentors, educates, and advocates for the next generation of clinicians. Dr. Martin utilizes a unique approach combining culture, science, and history to educate and empower others. Dr. Martin believes that we are only as educated as the narratives that are shared and strives to increase the discussions surrounding the intricacies of the Black experience, trauma-based interventions, coordinating community resources, and coalition building. So that is Dr. Martin's bio, and we are just so pleased, excited, and honored that she'll join us today. And I will hand it over to Dr. Martin um, so that she can begin her slide presentation.
Great. So I typically start my slides with quotes from some of my favorite authors. And the first quote is, "There is no thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." And the reason why I typically start off with this is one of my favorite authors, but also because I think a lot of times when we think of culture and we think of supporting individuals in their culture and their identity, we don't always think about the intersectionality of that in terms of your ethnicity, in terms of your gender, or if you do not identify with a specific gender, in terms of your age, where you're from, where you were brought up, even what languages you speak. So I think when we're thinking of culture, we also need to be aware of the expansion of that, because there are certain things that will impact me as a Black person. There were certain things that will impact me as a woman, and then things that will impact the intricacies of being a Black woman, and being a Black woman who is a mother, and being a Black woman who is a mother who is also like incredibly privileged as someone who has like a PhD. And then I also have my own home. And so I think sometimes we try to think about it in terms of different lenses, but they're Venn diagrams and they're overlapping everywhere. And I think when we try to also address different identities, then we can also think of other ways to support people, because certain things will be supportive in different aspects as a Black person, and also as a woman, and also as a mother. Okay, so next slide, please. One of the biggest things I always talk about when we're thinking of ways to support individuals is just understanding like the different aspects of oppression overall, because oppression, period, like as an ideology, is just the belief. It's built on the belief that one group is somehow better than another. And then because they're better than another, they have the right to oppress others, right? And there are different levels of oppression. And I think it's always helpful to look at the different levels, because you can support people in different ways according to the different levels, right? Like when it comes to anti-racism and anti-oppression, it is about like work. So to identify different aspects of, is it interpersonal oppression? Like the fact that one group believes that it's better than another, they reinforce that by disrespecting or mistreating other individuals, calling them inappropriate names, or like harassing them. That's interpersonal oppression, right? The way that we would advocate for that is we would establish specific policies. We would make sure that there's some aspect of, I don't want to say like punishment, but there's something that you have to deal with as a result of supporting that kind of interpersonal oppression. There has to be not retribution. I think it's like, I hate using the word punishment, but like something where you have to be held accountable for your actions. And we have to make sure that there's some aspect of an environment that shows that like this will not be tolerated, right? There are certain places that you go where you're like, oh, I don't think this is the right place for this. Like if you walked into, I don't know, McDonald's maybe, in like a ball gown or something, like, everyone comes into McDonald's in different ways, but you might be like, something about this just doesn't fit. Something about like what I'm wearing, or me as a person, I just seem like I don't fit. People need to feel like that when it comes to like engaging in racist or oppressive behaviors, right? Like they need to know that that's not the space for this. They need to have the aspect, and we'll talk about it before, but like calling out versus calling in when they're interpersonal oppression or acts of racism. So you can just be like, oh no, this isn't the space for this. And to be held accountable for this, you need to leave, and then you need to figure out what's going to happen next. Like they need to know that that's not what's happening, right? When we think about institutional oppression, we think about things like policies, and you think about things like systems. It could be something as simple as there's no system in place that talks about oppressive policies when it comes to hair, like wearing hair in certain ways or different hair colors and things like that. And if you're talking about generationally, newer generations are more likely to have certain hair colors. They're more likely to have things like tattoos and piercings. So are we being oppressive towards not only individuals because of their ethnicity, but also because of their age? Like, what do the policies say? You have to wear your hair a certain way, it has to be a certain length. If we're even just talking about not even just hairstyles, but hair length, that can be detrimental, and it disproportionately impacts indigenous populations when it comes to hair length. Right? Like, oh, you should just have a short cut. That's an integral part of my culture. So now I'm not able to have access to a specific job or even apply because you feel like it's appropriate to put that on me, right? So look at policies. You want to look at if there are certain things in place that advocate for individuals having access to different resources. And then also accommodations when it comes to like ADA accommodations. Like when it think about oppression, when we talk about like intersectionality, expand it, right? Like, is this impacting, it's not only just like Black people or people of the global majority. What about women? And what about people who did not identify as men or women? What about different generations? They have different things, like the way that they manage stuff, it may disproportionately impact. I had a student tell me the other day that she couldn't believe I had her type in Microsoft Word instead of Google Drive. And I said, I don't know how to address this conversation without sounding ancient. However, I used to write my papers and I don't like Google Drive. So don't use it. I want to see Times New Roman. I want to see double space, that Calibri, whatever you pronounce it. If I see it, I'm failing you. All right. I want to see APA citations. I want to see what I want to see. Okay. Humor me, please. But even in that, she told me I was being oppressive. I teach my students a little too well. She told me I was being oppressive to her generation. God. You know, sometimes it's like it's a bad thing to teach them to advocate for themselves. Like yesterday, my son told me he needed space and I went to cry in a corner somewhere. But I cried in the corner, so I didn't make him feel guilty for his needs. Progress. But yeah, so also advocating for different things when it comes to generational differences and things of that nature. When it comes down to internalized oppressions, that is more so the impact of consistently being in an environment where you feel oppressed, right? And eventually it becomes your inner dialogue, it becomes your inner thought, right? That's something that you can provide help with when it comes to providing access to services, right? Like I know we're gonna talk about it later, but providing access to counseling services and things of that nature. And then also just cultural oppression. And that has to do with like providing different events and access to being able to express your heritage in the way that you see fit, because the fact that like when you, in order to get a degree, in order to get like even just a diploma, you have to be educated in European American history. That's a requirement. It's so ingrained in the institutional policy that like my heritage would be an elective. And I can study my heritage or not and get my degree. However, in order to graduate from high school, I have to know when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's cultural oppression. Right? The fact that it's not norms that you can learn about different aspects of heritage. Florida, my goodness, is going through it. They tend to be going through it though. You know, they tend to have a difficult time. Hope it works out for them. But the only way that'll work out is like just the different aspects of advocacy, right? So when we think about oppression and we think about like, how do I be anti-racist or how do I be anti-oppressive? First you have to see what level they're experiencing. What aspect is it? So that you can help them on that level, right? If they're dealing with like an interpersonal issue with like one individual harassing them, one, it will be the difference and you can call them out, call them in. Two, you can also look at like policies that show like the ways you're going to be held accountable for that. And three, if you're going to deal with like possibly being internalized from that, you can provide them with some therapy resources, right? But each one is important because each one is going to have a different like plan of action. And a way that you can support. And when you think of like anti-racism and anti-oppressive, you need to think of like plan of action and support. And like the way that it can be helpful. Because one of the things that can be really important is to make sure that you are being like an accomplice and not an ally, right? Like, oh, you know, I am against interpersonal oppression. That's great. I noticed when that person was like being like using pejorative statements to me, you just stood there. So it's one thing to state that you're like actively against interpersonal oppression, and I would never say those words, but it's also another thing to be complicit in the fact that your peer and colleague thought that that was appropriate. And also, why do they think that that's appropriate around you, right? When it comes to, like, say we're talking about the justice system, or say we're talking about law. If you were in a car with someone and then they robbed someone and then you drove them away, you would be going to jail as well because you were complicit. You know, you should have drove away and been like, I don't know what you're doing, but you do not have a getaway car with me. You know, like it's the same thing when it comes to why do people feel like if we are in an environment and we're like, I want you to understand that this is a supportive environment, this is a safe space. What do you have in place that shows that it's a safe space? It's not only about policies, it's also about backing it up. Why does that person feel comfortable stating those terms around you? Just because you're not saying it doesn't mean that you're not being complicit, right? How do we deal with that overall? Next slide. And one big thing is like calling out versus calling in. Now, I will say both of these have their role. Both of these have an aspect of importance. But if we're talking about being anti-racist, if we're talking about being anti-oppressive, both of them deal with hurtful comments. However, when it comes to like calling out, it addresses the comment in the moment. Like it is likely it can be more uncomfortable, but the whole purpose of it is to just have the direct interruption right there. No, this is not an environment where we support severing someone's identity, where we support being oppressive, where we don't honor the pronouns that we were that we were told to use, where we don't identify, you know, even addressing like what land we're on. That's not what we do. In the moment, in the minute. But like calling in is more so addressing the issue privately. You discuss the intention, and likely takes more time. And you may have something like, oh, can we have a discussion about something that you stated? I'm really unclear as to what you meant by that statement. What was your intent and things of that nature? Now, both of them have their role. I think both of them support making sure that your environment is like actively anti-racist, because anti-racism is a verb. Right? Like it's not about like black boxes on Instagram. It's about like, I put the black box on Instagram, and I also went to that protest, and I looked at that white paper and used it as a reason to change our policy on this. Right? But the reason why it can be difficult to identify which one to use is, one, it could be a lot of work. Like calling in is more work. Right? It takes more time to get down into the weeds of people, to be like, what was your intention with that? You also may not be well versed enough to deal with the things that come up, and you may not want to. You may want to say like, I understand that was your intent. However, the impact was being offensive, abrasive, aggressive, and you very much severed the aspect of safe space that we were trying to support. So that seems like something that you should address. That's all I got, right? Because my job is not to educate you, unless it is literally like, oh, my job is to be the person who guides you through this whole process. Impact and intent are both important. However, as someone who has to deal every single day with the impact of what someone has said to my patients or my students or my peers or to me, I'm not really fixating on the intent. I'm fixating on like, I can't tell you what that person meant by that, because that person is not there. All I can do is try to help you deal with the hurt and the pain and like the thoughts and the feelings that deal with it. Impact and intent are both important. But I find that intent tends to be more something where you have to do the heavy lifting on your own. Like I can provide you with a resource, you got to read it. I can let you know different examples of books and narratives and trainings, but you have to go. And then you have to do the work outside of that space. But however, the impact is, now we have to deal with what you just did as like the Tasmanian devil, like ruining the place. Now I have to deal with someone who you offended. And now we have to find ways to hold you accountable. Because we do live in the information age. And at this point, not being able to be educated, not taking the time to educate yourself and other individuals, that's a problem within itself. Why do you not find the need to do that? When it comes to racism, I think a lot of times we look at like people of the majority and talking about like the harm it causes. But racism harms everyone. Supremacy harms everyone. Sexism, like ageism, ableism harms everyone. So why are you not outraged by that? Do you like, why does it not offend you to be seeing someone's humanity called into question? That's a big question to ask yourself, right? Like, oh, I didn't learn about it because it didn't impact you. How does racism not impact you? How does the detriment of someone's humanity not impact you? It impacts everyone. You should probably look into why you think it doesn't impact you. And there's some good resources about that impact. But yeah, so calling out versus calling in, they both have their really important parts. They're both really good ways to be like anti-racist and lead with action instead of paying lip service to them, but also realize that they also have different levels of, what is it called? Levels of time, like the time and energy you have to put into it, and just be invested in it. Also, I will say that it is not your job like to educate every single person. I do find that can be really difficult in different workspaces where people find the need to like call someone in and they feel like they have to do it because no one else is doing it. That's also an inkling of what's going on in the environment. I have to address this because no one else is going to. Well, that's a problem with your environment, isn't it? And the mental energy, the mental heavy lifting that comes with educating someone as like a Black woman, this is my whole job. And I took that job on willingly. However, because of that, there are days when I don't really feel like talking. Do I get to not talk? No, I'm married with 2 kids. It's just, it is what it is. You know, I can, you know, suck it up, you know, eat my fries in the car and then come in the garage. But, you know, other people didn't sign up for that, right? Like that's not part of your job description. So it is heavy lifting for a lot of people to feel like they need to have these conversations, for me to be here with you and sit with you while you address your privilege and dealing with the fact that I have to deal with racism. Like, imagine that. Imagine how much heavy lifting it has to do with like, let me help you process the aspect of your privilege and how that integrates with me having to deal with racist encounters. That's hard. So some people feel the need to do that because no one else is going to do it. But I want you to know that that's not your job. We live in the information age. There are people that you can hire. There are coaches for everything. I'm sure there is a racism related straight coach or a privilege coach, or looking at the intricacies of prejudice and privilege and power coach. Well, that's not your job as someone who's to be your colleague. And honestly, if you feel the need to consistently do that, one, I would address it within the institution about like, this is not being covered. That's why these issues keep happening. Two, what I would address it is like, why do I feel the need to do that? And three, I need to address it as like, if someone is repeatedly having these issues and they're only coming to me to educate them, what does that say about my relationship with them? What does that say with that, with what they see as like what my role is? Like, I don't work for you. So I would address it that way as well. Next slide, please. And one thing I mention a lot is like why I talk about like action, and why I talk about like, these are some good steps, and these are some ways to come up with plans and like to support people in different levels and environments. Is because one aspect of like stating that you're going to help someone and like saying that you're going to be anti-racist, or like saying that you're an ally. One, I feel like you don't get to say you're an ally. It should just be unsaid, right? Like, cause like, who said you were an ally? Who said that? That like, you don't get to call. It's kind of just like, I don't know. No, I don't know what it would be like. But like some people will state that they're like, oh, I'm an ally. I do this. And it's like, well, you haven't had any significant action to support us as a person. Why do you get to say who's an ally? And we don't really need allies. We need accomplices. I don't really need someone who will take the time to say, I don't support oppression. I need someone to say, there is no way that you are going to tell someone that they cannot wear that item just because it doesn't fit with your gender norms. So either you can leave or you can go. You can go or you can leave. But we're not going to have that here, right? That's showing me that you don't support that oppression, right? It's one thing to say, I really feel like children, like people should have the freedom to express themselves openly, like in their clothing, and also be able to have events that are solely for people of those specific identities. It's another thing to say, we decided in our policy that when it comes to the organizations, they are allowed to have events that are only for people who belong to the specific intersecting identities that are being addressed, because that builds comfort with them feeling like they can openly discuss things. So yes, we can have events that are open to everyone. However, every single individual, they're open to have women's only events and things of that nature, because certain people don't feel comfortable discussing it around everyone else. It's one thing to say it, but how are you going to do it? Right? So instead of saying that you're an ally, instead of saying that like, I don't support this, you can either say I don't support this and I did that, or you can just do it. I would say like be like Nike, but they're a terrible company. Just do it. Next slide, please. I will say that one of the things that comes with a lot of this work, and what comes with things, is like resistance fatigue, which is the exhaustion that's associated with advocating for change, trying to be engrossed in activism, staying abreast of current events, and you're going to be exhausted. Like in my field specifically, there's compassion fatigue. Taking on, I ingest joy for a living. I also ingest pain for a living. So I have some aspect of fatigue when I'm hearing about difficult events, when I'm coming up with ways to support individuals who are dealing with their own oppressive environments while I'm residing in my own oppressive environments, right? Like there's a fatigue that comes with that. So there's also an exhaustion with activism, with going to all those protests, with looking at all those news stories, with making sure that you know every single policy and things of that nature. I say it's good to be aware of certain situations. I also say that if there is a zombie apocalypse, you will know. You don't always have to be so plugged in, right? This whole thing, it's like, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And if you get burnt out, you can't serve anyone. And if anyone makes you feel bad for that, if anyone makes you feel bad for prioritizing your mental well-being, I would take the time to look at my relationship with that person. Because you only get one body. Being selfish gets a really bad rep. Some people will be like, oh, I don't want to be selfish. Selfish talks about like prioritizing yourself to the detriment of other people. Self-care, like caring for your well-being and prioritizing yourself, means making sure that you can keep going and keep going on. Why would I not prioritize myself? Last time I checked, this is the only body I have. And if you don't take care of yourself and then you end up having a breakdown or you need taking a moment, the first thing someone will say is, why didn't you take a break? mean? You mean when I said I wanted to take a break and you asked me why I wanted to take a break and then you made me explain why I wanted to take a break and then you made me come up with a medical note about why I wanted to take a break and then you say why I didn't take a break? I didn't know this was an environment receptive to that. Because you made me feel uncomfortable with taking a break, right? You get one body at this point, right? Prioritizing yourself is not selfish. Selfish is prioritizing yourself at the detriment of someone else. And actually, like, detriment is a wide range, right? Because my friends will say, I am selfish because I refuse to help them move. Honey, I will let me break my back and then I still got kids climbing on me. That's not selfish. That's prioritizing myself. They may feel harmed by it, but no. Right? Prioritizing yourself and selfishness are not the same thing. And individuals who feel like they're being harmed in that sense, I would also look at the range of that. Like, is it a tangible harm? If I hurt your feelings, we can address it. I'm not going to really shift my boundary on this. And always remember the difference between boundaries and rules. Like, boundaries guide your behavior, rules guide someone else's. You can only really control your behavior, right? You only can change what you're going to do. So it can be something as simple as like, okay, well, I understand that you like to engage in like this behavior that is incredibly inappropriate or this show that I feel like is harmful. I'm not going to tell you not to watch the show. I'm not going to be in here while you do it. That's my boundary. I'm not going to sit here and ingest that detrimental stuff in my realm, right? I'm not telling you what to do. That would be a rule. What I'm telling you is what I'm going to do, right? So when it comes to resistance fatigue, just take the time to realize that like everything is not going to be changed in a day. It very is a long-term thing. And yes, we do want you, everyone wants you to be educated. Racism hurts everyone. Patriarchy hurts everyone. Ableism hurts everyone. And you're not going to change everything by yourself. You also need support. And you can't do anything if your body is broken down. Next slide, please. Some signs to like resistance fatigue, I feel like are like jumpiness and hypervigilance. Like every time your phone rings with that, like I have hypervigilance every time like the phone rings with the Outlook thing, the Outlook sound. Every single time I hear that sound, I'm like, who is it? What? Who more do you want from me? But some people have alerts when like certain news stories and stuff come up. Like, how does that feel? Numbness to current events. Like you're starting to hear so many times of like natural disasters or I don't know, balloons randomly flying in the air or people being arrested that you start to feel numb to it. Doom scrolling, right? Like you can't even take, which go hand in hand with numbness, but like you can't even take in all the information because there's so much bad information, hopelessness, and then like physical and mental exhaustion. And this can also go with because you're going to every protest and you're staying up writing white papers and you're staying up doing all this that you forgot to eat, you forgot to hydrate, you haven't even gone outside to get air or get sun, and feelings of hopelessness. Right. I find that like a lot of people hold tension in their body. Everyone holds tension in their body. But like if you notice, yep, shoulder checks. I do eyebrow checks because a lot of times when I think I frown a lot, and I'm just like, oh, I know I look mad, but this is also like, this is really intriguing and it's making me think of stuff. I'm not going to punch you in the face. I promise. Unless, no, just kidding. But like, you know, like my thinking face is very much like frowning. So I do like that kind of things. But if you notice that you're having more aches and pains, it could be because you're holding tension in your body way more often. And you may not notice it. And then also having feelings of hopelessness. Like if you realize like the aspect of like the fight, having to deal with like the stress with everything, feeling like there's no way you can make a change. Like you used to get a boost from advocacy and now it just feels like another task that's difficult. That means it's time to take a step back. And it doesn't mean you need to take a step back permanently. It doesn't mean that you need to take a step permanently. However, it does mean that you may need a minute. And that's okay. Like the same way that my IT knowledge comes, like the breadth of my IT knowledge with technology is, we'll unplug it and then plug it back in. Like unplug it for a little bit and plug it back in and maybe that'll work. It's the same for people. Unplug a little bit. Just unplug a little bit, see if it just, you just need a hard reset. A lot of times, like in my family, I'll be like, you know, it's really important to express the affect, like the range of affect. So I'll be like, I need a minute or I need a hard reset. Because most of us have apples. And my hard reset, I'm like, and it's going to be, I need 45 minutes where no one talks to me and I don't know who mom is. And I'm going to do that in my car. I'm driving up the street, right? My hard reset can be a hot meal. My heart, you know, it could be a lot of things, but when it comes to like fatigue and having to find ways for people to support you, it's also really good to find ways to identify the range of what your emotions are and express them, right? There's a difference between being hungry and famished, happy and ecstatic, sad and depressed, or hopeless. And you're going to need different things at different levels, right? So I think one ways to help with like resistance fatigue and compassion fatigue and just pure exhaustion is to work on self-monitoring and identify what helps you during different times. Right? Like at a level of sadness at a 2, I probably just need a minute. Like I just need to like sit down. I might just look at some memes. When I'm feeling difficulties with levels of hopelessness and I'm like an 8 or a 9, I probably need to unplug. I probably need to not look at the news for a minute. I probably need to just have a minute to myself and then also a minute with my support system as well. Right? Like one of the ways, next slide, please. One of the ways I talk about dealing with resistance fatigue is like building community, but you also need to be aware that like community, if they're there for you, they want to help and support you, but you also have to provide them with the words for it so that they can know what you need, right? Like you don't always have to tell them what you need. It's always helpful if you can. But I think someone, if you hear you're sad versus if they hear that you're helpless, hopeless, and feeling depressed, they may feel like they need to step in a little bit more as well. I would say log out. I always say eat a cookie, but I say cookie is like it's the proverbial cookie. Like, okay, how many times can we read those nonfiction books that are just really tough? Maybe just read something that's a rom-com. All right. Like, okay, you just read Stamped from the Beginning. You just read The Color of Law, and you just read 1619. Back to back. When's the last time you read, like, I love J. California Cooper, but when's the last time you read something that was like light and airy? I forget, Jasmine, I think it's Gilliori, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, or a rom-com. Shoot, Bridgerton Diaries, I don't know. But like, you know, when you're taking in this information, especially as someone who focuses, like specializes in Black mental health, racism related stress, and from that, I always look at the historical perspective. The history of what has been done to like Black people and Black women is heavy lifting. I often have to break down the information I take in. It's my job to be educated on it. And the education is tough because the stuff that's been done to my community overall is harmful and it's hurtful and it takes a lot of energy to deal with. So I typically have to break my stuff up, right? Like reading books like that back to back, I don't do it. I don't do it, right? It doesn't mean I'm going to be uneducated. It means I'm taking the time to realize that like reading all those books back to back, sometimes they can make me have a sense of hopelessness. So I need some kind of like fun stuff to read. Watch a TV show that you enjoy. Watch whatever you want. There's no such thing as like a guilty pleasure. If you like watching, you know, people randomly buy homes that you don't know how they afford it. If you like watching Cake or Not, if you like watching Gordon Ramsay, who clearly needs to work on some stuff, like cook and be nice, like once out of a blue moon, watch it. Watch it. And if the person's like, I don't understand how you watch it. I can't watch it if you're talking. I don't understand. Go somewhere. All right, like I don't have any problem. Eat a cookie, right? Vegetables and just enjoy yourself, right? And it could also just be eating a cookie and not feeling bad about it. You know, a lot of times, you know, you need a dopamine boost and it could be from like working out and getting some sun. That's great. Take the cookie outside. Put an avocado on it if it helps. I don't know. But like, you know, just take the time to realize everything can't feel like work because that's not what we're meant to be to do on this earth. And when it comes down to it, advocacy, anti-racism, anti-oppression, policy, it's work. And the same way you understand that we're not meant to just like live on this earth and work every single second of the day, realize that too. Realize what you're fighting for. You might lose sight of what you're fighting for if you're spending all this time reading papers and going to protests and looking at the difficult part of it, and you don't get to spend time with your family or yourself. That's who you're really fighting for. That's who you're preserving land for. That's who you're trying to educate people for, so that the whole experience of humanity is something worth living. It's hard to do that if you lose sight of it, if you don't get to actually spend time with the people that you're fighting for in the first place, right? So like do that. Realize it's a marathon, not a sprint. And therapy is also incredibly helpful. Always. Everyone deserves therapy. Saying that you deserve therapy is not like it meant to be an attack against you or attack against your humanity. It's because of your humanity that you deserve therapy. You deserve the space to collaborate with someone whose dedication is to you. And that's not really able to happen most of the time. Most of our relationships are reciprocal relationships. If they're good, there should be give and take. When it comes to being my patient, like it's more so like it's reciprocal in the point that you showing up is what I need from you and to be present. But I'm focusing on you, your goals. That's my job, is to help you achieve your goals. And if it's a good relationship, no relationship is going to be not reciprocal. You got to, you know, But therapy isn't like that. And I think everyone deserves that space to have at least once. Next slide, please. Also, these are some books. So these are the nonfiction books. Okay, so these are the heavy lifting books that are some of my favorites. How to be anti-racist. So you want to talk about race, the color of law, bias. This book is anti-racist. So these are some good ones. This list is not exhaustive. I always get asked like, oh, what are some good books? Listen, most of them. I have 3 bookcases, 4 bookcases. We have to build 2 more. My husband at this point is going to leave me, but that will leave more room for books. So I don't know. It's hard to, when they're like, we're looking at like the aspect of like being the librarian, I was like, that's the coolest job in life. Oh my God, that's so cool. What? Except like having to like help people find books. Instead, I would just be like, that's a terrible book. Here you go. I gave you this one. I'm not giving you that one. Don't look for it. I'm happy you banned from all places. You can read the book you asked for when you read the book I gave you. And something tells me that wouldn't do well, So I would be a bit of an abrasive librarian, but still. So these are the nonfiction ones. These are the nonfiction ones. And then there are some fiction ones. These are some of my favorite books. Black Cake, I just finished. So these are like first on my mind. Girl, Woman, Other. And then Todi Adeyemi, Children of Bone and Blood. She came up with the second one. I think the third one, I think she's going to have like a book depiction, like a movie of it. The movie is never as good as the book. The movie is never as good as the book. You miss the entire internal dialogue. The power is in the internal dialogue. You need to hear them express what they meant. Plus, the movie always messes up what you think the character is going to look like. Because every single time I'm like, that's her? So, no. The movie's better than the book. Read the book before these movies come out. I can only imagine the movie's going to be amazing because like she's so good with like the narration. But these are some really good books that I think provide some insight into the narrative, like the Black experience and the experiences like a Black woman and things of that nature. But it also provides insight, and they use themes that talk about it. Like Children of Bone and Blood is all about like discrimination and racism and prejudice, but the way she does it is so good. I find that like Afro-surrealism and Afrofuturism does a really good job of that. It's really important to do that because when it comes to representation, a lot of times when I see things in the future, Black people are in the future too, right? Like we are able to think like do magic too. When it came to it's a Tim Burton, lost a fan, and I am an avid. Like, I want to see people in the most extreme costumes. I don't even want to know who is under that. Like, this is amazing. Those are the kind of books. When he mentioned the fact that he didn't felt like Black people could really fit like his narratives, it made no sense. Because if anything, you just have to be good at acting to be in his roles. You don't look anything like you look as a human being with him. He does amazing artistry. He does like the tech and you really just have to be good at acting to do well for him. Or be Helen Bonham Carter. Is he the one who Helen Bonham Carter's and everything? Yeah. Or be, yeah, one or the other. But she's also amazing at acting. So, like she's got both. So to make a statement in things such as like someone who has like this wide range of creativity, these amazing narratives where you can really just be anything, walk on the ceiling, like all this stuff. And the state that you don't see Black people being able to fulfill your roles, that's awful. Right? Because it's not being Black, it's the aspect of like, I can't see, Black people being good at this, or I don't see them, like it deals with their bias and prejudice overall. But these are some good nonfiction reads. I absolutely love them. And there's also like a million, like really good nonfiction reads. I just finished Black Cake like 2 weeks ago, and I was looking at Children of Bone and Blood when I was like putting in the books. And I was going to do a bunch of slides, but I feel like there are better ways to use my time. So I think that's the end of my slides. So I know we have questions and doing like the fireside part. And I really do like the aspect of like answering questions like off the top of the dome. I feel like that's the best part of the experience. So ask away. And we can just go from there and work that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. I mean, that was like just chock full of so many gems that I actually just kind of kept jotting down. But I think like our first question, you kind of answered a lot of that. There was a lot of meat in what you just discussed. So just to kind of riff off of some of the things you said about selfishness versus self-care,
Mhm.
I think maybe as like my first sort of pseudo question or just like a topic of discussion, I know that like for Black women and that intersection of racism and feminism and being a Black woman and how those things intersect, I think that we are socialized as Black women a lot of times to forego our own needs and our own desires and our our own ambitions sometimes, for like the greater good or for the family or for whatever you sacrifice for. And a lot of times our self-care is seen as selfish, like, oh, you have tons of dishes and housework to do, but you're sitting down and like you're watching an old movie, like, you know what I mean? And just talking about, I mean, I know that this isn't in particular with regard to racism related stresses, but when you start going into all the things that lead up to that and all the sort of societal stresses plus the issues of racism and that, I mean, that sort of racist wallpaper that we have to live with, and finding ways to not feel guilty about being a little bit selfish and having that self-care, those self-care moments.
I would say a couple of things. One, when it comes to the aspects of like chore tasks, things of that nature, I think a really good person or a really good person to read and listen to their podcast and all that is Casey Davis. She has this book entitled like Keeping House While Drowning. And her framework is very much the aspect of taking the morality out of care tasks. Like it doesn't make you a good person or a bad person to do those dishes. And and that's the biggest thing that like you feel stressful about. Like a good person has a clean home and a good person will clean every single Saturday while listening to Anita Baker. Like that's what you have. Right.
Yeah.
And it's not really about that. It's about just you deserve the fact that of a space that's functional for you. It doesn't make you good or bad to like clean those dishes or do the laundry on day 2 versus 22. You deserve a functional space. And if that functional space means like providing yourself the aspect of doing the laundry, it can be on Monday, it can be on Friday. It just needs to get done. You don't need to feel like a bad person just because you didn't feel like doing it that day, and find a way to make your space serve you, right? If the stress is like, oh, folding all these clothes, well, I mean, get hangers if that helps.
Yeah.
She very much has like a joint, it's like a family laundry room that she doesn't fold. Like they all have like everyone has like their bins, they wash the clothes, the clean clothes go in there, and you're able to still get your clothes and get access to it. If the issue is the fact that like during a time, excuse me, of significant stress and resistance and dealing with a lot of advocacy, you really don't have the energy to wash dishes, get paper plates.
Right. Yeah.
What do you really need? What's the baseline of what you really, really need um, to just have a functional space for you the next day? And she even has like a wind down routine where she's like, the thing I need at the end of every single day is to make sure that the dishes are clean and I have counter space. The rest of the house may be a mess. But the thing that I do every single night is to make sure the dishes are done. And that becomes less overwhelming for me because I know I just need this to have a functional space. And you deserve a functional space, right? But a lot of times people are feeling stressed out because they're like, well, I should be doing this. Why?
Yeah.
I should have this. If you're at a space where you can't do it and you can't care for that, then think of something else. Think of adjustment, right? Paper plates, frozen vegetables. They're frozen at like the height of freshness. I read that on every single thing, right?
Yeah. Right.
Get a rotisserie chicken, get a steamed bag of spinach and do that. You don't have to cook it all. You just need to be able to eat.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the aspect of like with the duality of the Black experience, I very much am at the place where like I do not feel that like Black women are we're just refusing to be like your shield and your target, right? Like I'm not going to advocate for things for every other person when I need to really contribute to like what's going on with my community. There's so many talk pieces about the fact that like Black women save us every single time, and I don't feel the need to do that.
Right.
When
Right.
I saved, then it's a race issue. But when you need to be saved, it's a woman's issue. I think that's a
Right.
problem.
Right.
And do we need to think about the things that contributed to us feeling unheard and unseen for so long? We can even look at, if you want to provide books about the difference between like feminism and womanism, if you want to look at the Combahee River Collective in terms of a book about why they felt the need to come up with the term of, and Toni Morrison was talking about like feminism is to womanism as like purple is to lavender. Like, why was there a need to do that?
Mhm.
Right. I don't believe in the whole aspect. There very much was the whole point of like Black Superwoman syndrome, and because of that, we are in the role to like care for everyone else. But I also feel like that kind of reinforces like the whole aspect of enslavement, where it very much was our role to care for other people and European Americans before our own.
That's true.
I don't subscribe to that, right?
Mhm.
If you want if you want support, and if you want things to be us advocating you for nature, then also make it to the point that it also encroaches us as well. Because if
Mhm.
it's a women's issue, why is it not also a Black women's issue, right? Like if we talk about women's suffrage and the human aspect, the aspect of the historical part of it, it wasn't advocating for like all women to vote.
And I
Women
think that's why Ida B. Wells was such a boss, because she just, she just said, okay, well, I'm a woman too, and so, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't just apply, voting rights, rights for women, advocacy is not just for white women, it's also for us too. So,
yeah, and
yeah,
housing issues and food apartheids and like stuff that like, oh, I don't have an issue getting food in my neighborhood as a mother, or childcare in my neighborhood. I said, okay, so what about the women that you identify as sisters, Black people in the other neighborhoods? Do they have an issue with getting healthy foods? Do they have an issue
right,
with childcare? Do they have an issue with their books, their children seeing themselves in their books? You may not have a problem that in your school, but that's because your child looks different. So why is that as a problem as a parent if we're all mothers?
right.
Is that not an issue for you too?
And it
Diversity
should
helps everyone.
be.
Inclusion helps everyone. It's
It
beneficial
does.
for everyone to see people that are different and understand, because I think in mental health and also in advocacy, the biggest thing that we miss a lot is perspective. The diversity of perspectives, we're only as educated as the narratives that are shared. So we need to be ingesting like a bunch of narratives, and you need to expose everyone to that. The same way I expose my children to everything, whether by choice or not. It's not really a choice as much for my children. I have to go the extra mile to buy characters that look like my child when I get toys, and make sure that I seek out books, which are way more, it's easier to do that now. But when I was growing up, my girl had to order my books from a special,
Yeah,
from like
yeah,
one store, and I still have them to this day.
yeah. It definitely was not as accessible as it is now.
Not accessible.
That's absolutely true.
To think of accessibility and anti-racism as a thing that helps everyone. And you need to listen to the aspect if like, if Black people, if Black women, if there are people in other cultures are feeling burnt out because they're doing all the heavy lifting, then you should be helping.
Right,
I should not be sitting down. You should be advocating for this as well. The
right.
Black excellence can be, at times it can be hurtful, because
It can.
why I should feel the need to do it all. And I don't want to.
Yeah. And I think that's the tremendous thing about this generation, is that they're saying, I don't want to carry that heavy load all the time. I mean, I think people like in my mom's generation, who's 60 going into 70, almost 70, you know, everything was sort of, this was the marker of womanhood. These were, the gender roles were very defined and things like that. So I think this generation is saying, no, I don't want to carry everything on my back. I don't want to, have this struggle love experience. I know that's like a digression from like our topic, but it kind of just relates in terms of, women and advocating for ourselves and saying when enough is enough, and understanding. Yeah.
I feel like their generation very much survived, and I think that's amazing. We're the
Hmm.
ticket to thrive. And I very much like the aspect of this generation being like, when they're told you have to do this, says who?
Right.
Who do I have
Right.
to do that? Right. I saw an article that said like their generation doesn't even like, I'm not even gonna apply to jobs if there's no salary on the thing. I don't do that either. If we want to talk about anti-racism and advocacy, pay transparency. Because the reason why a lot of people get paid less is because we make people feel like it's illegal to talk about their pay.
Hmm.
And if
It's
that's
true.
actually in the policy, if it's actually in the policy, you can't talk about income, think about who that protects.
It's true. Yeah.
Anti-racism, don't post any more jobs without putting the salary on there, and allow people to talk about pay transparency. That's
Sorry.
very racist, and that would help everybody.
Yeah, I agree. I'll transition to Rachel. I know she has some questions she wants to share as well.
Thank you so much. I would love to talk a little bit about, the aspect of self-care. Again, I kind of come from a generation where You don't necessarily reach out to a therapist. I had a good talk with a girlfriend, and it took her quite a bit of convincing to make that appointment. I know that there are a lot of barriers for people to access the care. We have, free resources that are available on campus. We have resources available for staff. We have resources available for students. But I know sometimes there's, it can be a barrier to even make that call. To say it's important for me to actually invest in myself and to take this hour of my day to just talk about how I'm feeling. What would you recommend? And I know you have some resources that I'm going to share with the chat, but if you could speak a little bit to that process of saying, yes, I actually want to try this for myself. I want to invest in myself for my self-care in this form of therapy. And then when I'm ready to do that, what do I need to be prepared for so that it is the most valuable experience that I can get? And I'm not getting a therapist that doesn't understand me, doesn't understand what I'm going through.
Yeah, one of the first things I mentioned is like identifying what is it called? Like I would do consult sessions. They're like 30-minute sessions. Sometimes they're in person, a lot of times they're on the phone, where you can ask questions of the licensed mental health professional, such as like what's your specialty? First, I always mention like the money part first. Like I always say, like, let's get to this money first, because I don't know if I can afford you. Right. So like, do you accept my insurance? If not, do you, what's your fee? Don't assume that because they don't accept insurance that you can't afford them, because most of us have sliding scales. They also may offer other options, like individual therapy tends to be more expensive than group therapy. Can you do group therapy for a little bit while you identify whether or not you need individual therapy? And I think they both have benefits. One of the things with individual therapy, you get that one-on-one aspect, but a lot of issues when it comes to mental health is the isolating experience. And sometimes being in that group environment can be very helpful for you as well. So typically, I would say sessions are typically private practice, probably like 150 a session, like starting off. Group therapy tends to be about 50. Like 35 to 50 a session. And there's also like virtual group options too. So that may also be helpful. So it may be less of a price. So identify what you need. Ask questions such as, have you ever worked in with my presenting concern or with my population, right? Because you may be looking for couples, you may be looking for family, you may be looking for family, but it's like intergenerational. You may be looking for like a psychologist who has a certain level of spirituality. Like there are psychologists that are Christians or Christian psychologists, right? Like there are certain people who that is one aspect of their identity, or it's an aspect of their treatment, of the therapeutic lens that they use to kind of help you, right? And that could be any form of spirituality. And for some people, that's what they want integrated in their space. Like that would help them heal when it comes to coping. So identifying that. And just feel how you see how you feel when it comes to like asking these questions. If the person is receptive to that, or even if they get back to you, because some stuff is just like, oh, well, this was a non-starter. Like, oh, this looked perfect, but you didn't email me back. So like the communication can be difficult, or you may not have even seen the email. A lot of times contact information is difficult, is wrong. So I think that can be helpful, and realize that when you go into the therapy space, I think so many people don't know what to expect. Just realizing that the purpose is to help you achieve your goals. Therapy and goals go hand in hand. I cannot understand how therapy will work without goals, because then you're just talking about like the crisis of the day or the crisis of the week. And that is not what therapy is for. Therapy is to help you identify your goals. And that will likely be integrated in the crisis of the day and the crisis of the week, right? Like if my goal is to deal with perfectionism, and a lot of times perfectionism is steeped in anxiety and fears of different things. And then the day talk that I'm talking about today is when I signed up for this huge assignment, and I can't complete it because I keep double checking and triple checking. Oh, well, okay. So this actually is a pretty recurring theme with coming up with these high standards that no one can meet. And now you're burnt out because you signed up for something that you volunteered for, even though you shouldn't have volunteered for. And like, let's talk about like how that identifies with like your theme of perfectionism. Like when you volunteered for this, what was the fear? Oh, I was afraid that like, if I didn't do it, it wouldn't get done right. Well, that's a pretty heavy assumption. Like, like it should be tied into what you're trying to work on overall. Right. So even just identifying goals for therapy can make you feel more comfortable, and like questions to ask yourself, like, am I happy with my relationships or my lack thereof relationships? And not just with others, with myself. Do I like the way I talk to myself? or people? Did I have a recent conflict? Did I like the way I handled it and I would love to handle it like that again? Or did I not like the way I handled it and I kind of like severed that relationship? Are there certain things that I want to achieve in life that I haven't and I don't know what's happening? Have I had a recent transition that I'm dealing with? Am I happy? Like, do I like me? Am I just happy? And if not, like, can I have someone to help me like process and collaborate on working on that? Right. Or
Right.
identifying themes and even just like writing and addressing it. Right. Like sometimes we feel overwhelmed because we don't know what we're working on. Well, you may not know yet. You may decide like when you're talking in therapy, you come in and you think you're going to talk about your Starbucks order and you realize that your issues with relationships stem from your attachment and equating love languages with something that you've never felt comfortable expressing. Right. Like
Right.
the goal is to come into the space with an open mind. It can be helpful to come in with goals, but you can even come into therapy like something's wrong. I don't feel like myself. You can identify it from symptomology. There's stuff I used to enjoy. I don't enjoy it anymore. I don't like spending
Right.
time with people. I'm eating more and sleeping less, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know what my goal is, but I don't like feeling like this. And I
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's all real. That's just to come approach it with as much honesty as you possibly can.
And be
Um,
aware of if you're talking to someone and you don't feel comfortable, like you feel like you can't be honest with them if there's something about their vibe or I don't know, like their environment and stuff, that's likely not the person for you. Like, yes, it
right.
takes time to warm up, but if you can't shake the part that feeling like you're being judged or you feel like the person isn't listening or they're consistently late to appointments,
Right.
probably not the person for you. You don't always have to come in with goals. You can just come in with how you feel, stuff you like, stuff you don't like, and stuff like that.
Right. Which leads me to your packet of guidelines for directing people to your website, so that they can so that they can access your guidelines for choosing a therapist, which I think are extremely helpful, and very practical and very useful, guidelines for sort of judging, that fit and having that right fit. Um, so I've just been given a notice that we should um, go to the submitted questions from the audience, if that's all right. Um,
Mhm.
if somebody could,
I can take that first one. This one was the first question that we received from the audience when we asked. And I think it covers so many aspects that you touched on, and I'd love to have you do a deep dive. How can a racism victim cope when they are blamed for the problem and the system is set up to protect the person who does harm? There's so much layers to that. So I would love you
yeah,
to deep dive into that.
Um, are the questions anonymous?
Yes, these were anonymous questions.
Okay, so because when it comes to like blame for the problem, I kind of like to break down the problem and then provide tangible ways that you can express how it's not like it wasn't on you. Um, One of the things is when it comes to like dismantling difficult situations and environments, you shouldn't have to do it alone. If you do have to do it alone, I would say it's incredibly it's definitely more difficult, but find support in the people around you, like it is ways that can help you workshop ways to manage it. However, if you don't have to do it alone, if there are people who are like, oh, I also had an issue with this. Oh, I also think that was like racist or egregious or oppressive. Be like, great. So let's write this letter together. Let's go to this meeting together. Let's identify like why this was an issue. I also think it can be difficult for people to have to explain why they thought something was racist. Like it can be incredibly overwhelming to one, deal with the emotional aspect of the impact of what someone placed on you, like a racist intent, I mean, a racist action, and be forced to explain it. So I think that can also be incredibly difficult to deal with. One way to process that is maybe to take a step back and figure out a way to verbalize it. Like, I don't think you should have to. However, in order to advocate for yourself, and it seems like if you're doing it by yourself, sometimes people need, or the only way to operate in that realm is to provide examples of, well, this is an offensive statement because it's steeped in the stereotype that Black people only wear certain clothing. This was incredibly offensive because it's steeped in the thought that as a woman, I wouldn't be able to do this. And that is openly and overtly based on a stereotype, which is a cultural, a broad generalization within my culture. It's offensive and it impacted me in this way. And we need to address it that way. Also, I would also think it's amazing if you didn't have to do all this and you can either like remove yourself from the environment or be in an environment where there are things set up to have people support you, right? Like if there are policies in place where you could just be like, oh, this blatantly goes against like this policy. We have this policy, which is identified as like the safe place policy, and you went against that. I'm going up the chain of command to address it, either as a student or as an employee. You can tell them that, or you can just go up the steps when it comes to addressing it as like a student employee and go from there. There's no reason why someone has to know the intricate details of what, oh, I did this because you offended me. Well, if you want to address it that way, fine. But either way, I'm going to like HR or the DEI individuals or like the counseling center, right? Especially if it's a repetitive thing. I would also deal with it in therapy, because in therapy, it can also be helpful for individuals to help you process it and come up with like sound solutions about ways to address it. If there are any specific groups, like there are like organizations, like in clubs, like we had BSU. They can also come and help you workshop the issue overall so that you can come at it, because it's likely an environment that you're not able to like quickly exit. Not that you should have to, because you shouldn't have to be run off any environment in the first place. However, sometimes you may want to deal with it head on, and sometimes you may just want to be like, I don't want to fight this. I just don't want to be around you, right? Find support in the other communities and see if they can help you workshop and find ways to address it. See if there are any policies in place that you can also like attribute to like the policies that were violated. Make sure you're getting some mental health support as well, because if you felt like it was racist, and dealing with racist encounters disrupts your mental health and well-being, your physical health and well-being, and it just sucks, right? So don't feel like you need to negate your experience just because someone doesn't acknowledge it. It's still your experience, and it very much is true, but link up with some support, because there's no reason why you should have to do this alone. And I'm assuming at a universities are pretty good at having those like specific unions for our certain identities and cultures. So I'd also say do that, and ask for help.
Thank you for that. I think sometimes people feel very isolated, and sometimes don't even have the language to be able to express it. So, and that can, I think, sometimes be a barrier to accessing some of the support services that are available. So I put in the chat a few things that are available, but thanks for pointing out that community is very important when dealing with this and coping with that. I hear a lot of pain in that question.
It's true. It's true.
Don't feel the need to justify like, well, this is racist, because like you can decide whether or not you want to, have the conversation. Do you want to retain this relationship or any of that? Or you can decide like, I just want to deal with the impact of what was done, and I want this person to be held accountable. You don't always have to build a relationship or try to educate your offender.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's important, because that goes into that additional heavy lifting and taking on, additional work. And sometimes you just want to address it and be able to move on and, exist.
And make sure it's like, my intent, I have no interest. Like I'm not trying to, this isn't a session.
Yeah.
I want you to be held accountable. And then I want to probably, if you grow, that's great. I don't really want to engage with you in the future anyway.
Yeah.
Decide to grow. You need to grow because you want to, not because of me, because I have no interest in engaging with you anymore anyway.
Right. And that's just real. Yeah. So we have another question. This one is, how should I handle a Black person that does not resist and just goes along with attempting to climb the corporate ladder? So I'm assuming this is probably from a Black person who maybe feels a way that maybe other Black people are not choosing to resist, and goes along with attempting to climb the corporate ladder. That was the question.
It's kind of not, it's not your business. There's no other way to say it. There's no other way to say it.
Yeah.
So the thing is, when it comes to, I think I mentioned before, like boundaries guide your behavior, rules guide someone else's. It seems like you're trying to guide someone else's behavior. And that's not your responsibility. If it's detrimental to the progress that you are trying to make, if you wanted them to be like an accomplice of what you're trying to achieve, it seems like that's not going to be them. And if that's not within them to try to do, if they don't see the benefit in it, it's not your job to try to convince them. Right? Like if that's like, I don't see any benefit in it. Okay, well, you're not the person that I need to work with on this, and you need to just keep it moving. It seems like that it also like it doesn't seem like a person that you would want to build a relationship with. And that can be a difficult thing. It's like, oh, this is my friend, and they won't advocate in the realm that I want them to. They won't do what I want them to do. It sucks, but it doesn't seem like you could build a friendship with them on some things. Some
Right.
people very much can be like, oh, I can have disagreements with people and still be friends with them. But to me, that's like pizza toppings. That's not like whether or not you see me as a human being, right? It's not on your mushroom. It's not like, oh no, this was blatantly racist and you didn't advocate for me and I can still be cool with you. No, right? So if you have that and you're in that realm and this person is just like, hey, like this is something that's detrimental to everyone and it's not impacting you right now, but it impacts us as a whole, and you don't see a problem with it because you're still climbing the corporate ladder, that's not something I want to have with someone I want to have a relationship with. It's also, it's not your job to make them want to help. They should, if they don't want to, that's on them. If they end up being, oh, kudos to you. I hope you have a great time if you're at your party of one, right?
Right. Because resistance looks differently for every person.
Yeah.
I mean, resistance looks different for every person. I mean, sometimes we think that just doing little things like starting collectives where people can talk, or, you know, saying, hey, I want us to start having a Black, it feels very small because you don't feel like it's impacting a larger group. But advocacy and resistance is different for every person. Maybe it's just posting something on your socials, and that's your form of resistance. Maybe it's going to a protest. You know, we can't dictate like how people want to resist or choose to resist, or even don't want to resist at all. It's just, you know, so yeah.
Well, yeah, and we don't get to, and that's that. One, it's not your job. Two, I would ask myself in this situation, why is this something that I feel like is my role? Why do I feel like it's my job to decide who gets to resist in what way? Like, because we're talking about anti-racism, anti-oppression, and very much it is the aspect of like, you have to follow it up with action. And if you don't follow up with action, then you're just not an anti-racist person. That's just what it is. You know, I may not be in that position, but I'm not going to sit out here saying that I'm making change and I'm not.
Right.
Why do I find the need to state that you're not doing it the right way because it's my way? Because honestly, when it comes down to it, one of the characteristics of white supremacy is having one right way to do things.
That's true.
And you don't know what someone is doing behind the scenes. And even if they're not doing enough behind the scenes, that is none of your business. Is it your partner? Because I mean, if it's your partner, I'd say, ooh. Just like a colleague at work, you know, like someone you're friends with, it seems like you can't look past this to build a relationship with them, and that's fine. If it's someone that you don't even engage with that often, why do you feel the need to impose your will on someone else? That's something you need to focus on in yourself. Like, there's so many layers, but you can't choose. And also, they're like, you can't make people engage in certain behaviors because they belong to the same identity as you, because they're Black.
It's true.
We're not a monolith. They may decide that, like, oh, you know, I don't find this as something that impacts me. It very much may impact you, and you won't find out until it does. Some people don't need to be bitten on the behind to realize that, like, oh, maybe I should have put on like bug repellent, but some people do. You don't know people's level of, because like, it's like a Black identity development thing, right? Like, people are at different stages at different times.
It's true.
Maybe at the stage where activism and advocacy is really important, and very much like many models state that, like, in order to achieve a certain level of identity, like that internalization, that final stage, or be at a higher stage, you have to have some role in advocacy, because in order to be firm in your identity, you also may feel the need to advocate for people that look like you. That person needs to not be there. You can't penalize them for not. You might just don't hang out with them.
Right. And it grows in terms of like your development and your maturation on a personal level. You know, maybe right now they don't see it as important, but maybe they'll grow to see it as important. And, you know, it just depends on, you know, where you are. And we're not the arbiters, you know, of who gets to, you know, when you're resisting and when you're not. Yeah. So
it doesn't make it any less important. I tell my patients all the time, someone's inability to see your worth and acknowledge your worth has no bearing on your worth. You not being able to see my worth doesn't make it any less prevalent, any less present, any less.
That's so true. Yeah.
That's wrong with your glasses, right? Them considering it not being an issue doesn't make it any less of an issue. That's just somebody that's not going to be an accomplice with you on it.
Right. Right. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last question that we got in was, or the ones that came in preliminarily, was what are your personal methods for combating fatigue, or AKA self-care, while doing this work?
Oh, I unplug a lot. I happen to be on social media a lot when it comes to like posting, but I'm actually not really on social media a lot. I post stuff and then I throw my phone somewhere and play with my babies, or hide from my babies. Either way. Like, so I unplug often. Like, social media is very much like, at this point, because there isn't that much access to free content from licensed mental health professionals, I consider it a part of my job, but it's a part of my job to post. It's not a part of my job to like doom scroll at all. I also make it a point to like, I don't ingest, pain in my free time. Like, my job is pretty heavy lifting. I train significantly like in trauma at Hopkins. I very much deal with racism related stress as also being a consistent victim of racism. So I'm not going to be reading the books that are engrossed in like Black pain if it's not like something that I need to know for like a framework or a research project. I don't look at media representations of like Black pain, and I do not watch any movies that focus on the aspect of enslavement of Africans. I get it. I don't need to watch a movie to see it. A lot of times I also unplug from the news. And then I make it a point to spend time with the people that I feel like support me and that are in my community, right? And spend time with the people that support me, and also spend time by myself. I talk for a living. I read for a living. A lot of times when I'm in roles, I'm in a leadership position. So a lot of times it very much is my job to like handle stuff. So sometimes I don't want to talk. My husband and I go on date nights every week. And we bi-weekly, like one is our date night and the other person is the assignment. The assignment, like when it's his night, only thing I choose is what I'm wearing. Just tell me like, are we dressed? Am I wearing jeans or like a dress? I do not want to know. I'm not contacting the sitter. I'm not picking out the restaurant. I'm not doing an RSVP. Don't send me a menu. I don't know if I want to go to a movie. All I need to know is, am I wearing sneaks or flats? I don't wear heels. They don't like me. I don't like them. Okay. I like them on other people, but not on me. Right. Like, so in many roles, sometimes I need community. Sometimes I need silence. Sometimes I need to be in the decision-making role. And sometimes I just want to show up, but I know when I need those at different times. Right. So it took a while to advocate for the part of being like, oh, we're going a date night. And I'll ask you. And I had to be like, hey, anytime you ask me like a decision-making process, even when you say it's totally up to you, I'll do whatever you want. That is still work for me, because now I have to figure out what I want and tell you. So you don't get the date night points, and that's what you want, right? You don't get them. Anytime you have to ask me a question, what's the sitter's number? I don't know. It's not my night. It's not my Friday. I don't know. So like, I would also state like identifying what you need in that space. Very much be aware of like, when you're on social media, like pay attention to your body, like the tension in your body. Kind of like Rachel mentioned too. I very much like scour my algorithm. I very much use the algorithm the way it's supposed to be used. Certain videos that I don't like, I don't stay watching them. I click not interested. I unfollow people who make me feel like crap. Like social media works when you work. You just gotta know how to work it. I put on filters that like that certain videos that may be like triggering don't automatically start playing. All of that. Like like my algorithm for TikTok probably thinks I'm like an 80-year-old woman who just likes to crochet, and I am. Like I put not interested. I put the videos I like, and I put the videos I don't like. Don't want to see this ever again. What was this? This feels like work. And even starting TV shows. I used to love Law and Order's SVU. I trained in trauma with significant amount of like sexual assault trauma. SVU felt like work. Stop watching it. Haven't seen the show in years, probably like 6, 7, 8 shows. When I used to watch it, all the main, the characters that were on there aren't even on there anymore. Actually, one passed away. So I pay attention to my body when I'm engaging in stuff that I used to like. And then I also self-monitor a lot. I'm very much aware of the things when I'm off my game. Like when I'm like super tired and cranky, when I have low frustration tolerance, it's typically a sign that something is wrong. Because my threshold is pretty high. But when I get like mad about a very minor inconvenience, I probably need a nap or something to eat, or I need to like chill out. And a lot of people don't know low frustration tolerance is actually most of your signs. Y'all just don't know it. No one is meaning to walk around being cranky. It's not normal. Like you may not be able to pinpoint when it started, but for most people, your low frustration tolerance is a sign that something is wrong. Like you being incredibly cranky, it's you just woke up. What the heck? It's easy to get to a 10 on like the anger scale and the frustration scale when you wake up at an 8 every day. So I try to just self-monitor a lot. And then I just really, I consider the like prioritizing myself like a part of my job. Like we weren't doing the date nights. And then I was like, I can't function this way. The kids aren't sleeping. I need to at least have a minute where I don't get called mom. So we scheduled it. A lot of times I see them as things I see as my job. I work out, hate it. There's not one part of me that likes working out. However, like it's very odd that I can't walk up the steps without wheezing. So I kind of have to work out like it's a part of my job. I kind of just see it as part of my job. Like, oh, well, I'm sorry, but I do have to eat this pizza alone. It's part of my job. I do not need to share at all. You know, like it's my job to stay healthy. And the only way I'm going to do that is by not sharing. Sorry.
Thank you so much. It's so, if there's anything, it's like, if you want to say that thing about waking up at a frustration level, or even a sadness level of, or a hopeless level as an indication that something is really wrong, and to be able to care for yourselves, right? Like the people, you bring that energy to everyone else that you interact with, right? And I think that's something that is a sign and a signal of, check in with yourself, get your resources, use it, invest in you so that you could be a better person to all.
And you're helping your whole community. Because when people notice that you prioritize yourself, and they'll be like, the nerve of you to take care of the only body you have. Wait, should I be doing that too?
Yeah.
You mean you're not doing that because you don't want to do that? And you're comfortable with telling me, oh, I'm not doing that because I don't want to. What do you mean?
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you to go a little bit deeper into that. And also, we do still have some time for external questions. So we haven't seen any, we saw a couple in the Q&A. We do have time for that other than the pre-submitted questions, so please get those in. But if you could speak a little bit more about, some of the language around, you talked about setting boundaries, even with loved ones, and asking for what you need. How did you get to that point? Was that something that you had to learn as a skill, or is that something that came naturally for you to be able to verbalize that?
It did not come naturally. Honestly, most of the time, the only thing that came naturally was me being grumpy, but not really understanding like what the root of the grumpiness was. And most of it was like I was in academia. The higher I go up, the less people that look like me. So that was also like very stressful for me. One of the things that contributes to like racism related stress is being like tokenized, like being the first. A lot of people advocate for, but it's also like a very stressful role to be in. So being tokenized in environment was very stressful. Also, crossing your boundaries, like violating my boundaries, breeds resentment. Like I would be upset that I didn't say no to something. I would be upset that someone asked me to do something, but really the issue was that I said yes. Like people have the right to ask you to do things. You don't have to say yes. So then I would be upset that like I showed up to help you, and upset like, and it's like, well, no, the problem is me, right? Because I didn't take the time to say no. Because either I had concern that you wouldn't take it well, which is telling about our relationship, right? Or I felt uncomfortable doing it, which is telling about my relationship with myself. Like I need to be able to advocate for myself, right? So a lot of times people will violate their own boundaries, say yes to stuff they don't want to, go places they don't want to go, engage in activities they don't want to, because they think it's contributing to like building that relationship. But breaking your boundaries contributes to the detriment of the relationship. It doesn't help anything. Right. And then you end up getting upset, and you should be upset at yourself because you should have said no. Right. Most of the time I'll state like, I don't want to do that because I don't have an interest in it. I'm too tired. I don't really need to provide an explanation. I just don't want to. And I really trust the people that I engage with enough so that it won't be the detriment of our relationship, and you respect me enough to be honest with me about how that makes you feel. And if it makes you feel upset or uncomfortable, we can talk about it, right? Because when you're not honest with people, when you don't have those discussions, part of it can be that you don't trust their response. And if you don't trust their response, do you think they're going to be upset with you, angry with you? Are you not equipped to deal with that? Do you feel like your relationship is not equipped to deal with a conversation about a disagreement? Like, I trust you enough to be honest with you. I don't want to. And if that offends you, I trust you enough to be honest with me, and then we can have that dynamic and that conversation. But when you're holding stuff back, a lot of times I feel like you feel like the relationship is on shaky ground, and it's honestly an indicator of lack of trust. Because I should trust you enough to know that you prioritize my well-being, and you should trust me enough that I prioritize yours. And when dealing with people, we're going to have some kind of conflict, but conflicts don't have to be stomped down, breakout fights. It can just be, well, I don't want to do it. Oh, okay, well, I really wanted you there. And I was like, it's kind of obsessed with that you don't want to be there. And not and I understand if you don't want to go. So, okay. And I did want you there. And it's like, okay, and I'm not going. And it's not negative. It's just like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I get that you want me there and I don't want to be there. And is there another opportunity where we can hang out in a time where I can be more receptive to engaging with people, when I'm not exhausted, when I actually want to come out the house? This doesn't have to be the only time we engage with people. Or I don't want to go because I don't like your friends. The only friend of yours that I like is me. So stop inviting me to stuff with your friends if you don't want me to stop saying, if you don't want me to say no. We can hang out one-on-one. I don't like them, they're rude. Don't, have the open conversation and have the trust that your relationship can handle conflict. If you're dealing with, you're going to have conflict, but conflict doesn't have to be, you can have honesty without brutal honesty. You can have conflict without it being a fight. Trust the fact that you guys respect each other enough to have a conversation about what your boundaries are when they have been violated, and just be aware that, like, when your boundaries are violated, you have violated them, because a boundary guides your behavior. There's all these things about what to do when someone breaks your boundaries. And it's like, you mean talk to yourself? Because you broke your own boundary. Now, if somebody breaks a standard or a rule, that's a different thing. But a boundary only guides your own behavior. So whenever I see those think pieces, I'm like, that's not even what a boundary is. You need to think about, like, what to do when you break your own boundary. Address it. Have a conversation. The conversation may be like, I wonder if I felt uncomfortable saying no because they always get mad and I don't like the way they react to that. That's something you can address, but they didn't violate that boundary, you did.
Yeah. So can you give me an example of how that plays out in the workplace? You talked about that with personal relationships. And I think sometimes when you have those trusting relationships with a spouse, with a friend, and you say, yeah, I really don't want to go to that thing. I really don't like doing that thing. It's, people feel a little bit more comfortable there because they have that personal trust. How do you build the skills to be able to do that when it's your boss, when it's a coworker, when it's a peer?
Practice. I do it all the time. I find that people will see me as, like, really, really direct. And some people will say, like, oh, that's difficult. But some of my friends are like, it's very helpful, the fact that you're direct, because I don't have to worry about offending you, because if I offend you, you'll tell me. I don't have to do the guesswork of being like, was that mean? Because it's like, oh, if it was mean, Raquel will say, oh, that was mean. I don't like that, So sometimes people will be like, oh, they'll define as, like, passive aggressive, but passive aggressive still has the word aggressive in it. I feel like people forget that. But I just tend to be more direct. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm really just trying to express where I'm coming from. So, like, I've had issues where I had my supervisor at some point, he was, like, very touchy-feely and, like, would, like, touch shoulders and stuff. And I said, like, I am very particular, like, my personal bubble, and I don't like being touched, especially by, like, an older man, who is, like, a colleague at work. And I was just like, it's just very clear, like, oh, I actually don't like being touched like that. And that was it. He never did it again. Right. I don't think it severed our relationship. And if it severed his, if he stopped doing it, that's all I kind of care about, because I'm uncomfortable with it. Or I have a person who, like, we're very cool at work, and we would talk all the time, but sometimes I need to make sure I, like, actually got work done so I didn't get fired. So, like, sometimes he would be talking and I would just be like, oh, hey. I was like, I need actually, like, 40 minutes of, like, working on this, because anytime I talk to you, I get deterred, and then I end up doing work at home, and then I'd be irritated. So, like, I just need 40 minutes. And I'll be like, set a timer. Love you. Get out of here. Okay. Because I can't do work at home again. All right. Or conversations with, like, being dragged to events and just being like, oh, why don't you come? You don't want to come. We always enjoy it when you come, trying to make you feel guilty. One of the reasons why I do this, like, with children a lot, with, like, expressing their goals, is, like, because you don't want to use, like, emotional manipulation to make someone feel like they have to attend something. I do this with my kids. Like, if they don't want to do something, I say, okay, that's fine. And then, I'll suck it up and cry in the corner, but I won't cry in front of them, because it's like, that's emotional manipulation. That all that shows is that people just need to up the ante to make you feel that their feelings are prioritized over yours. Right. So when it's just like, oh, we really want you to go. Oh, we always have so much fun. Do you want to go? It's just like, well, I don't want to go. I just don't feel like doing it. So I'm going to go home and prioritize myself. Right. It really addressing, sometimes it'll be as clear as, oh, well, we really want you to go. And I've said multiple times, okay, so what you're telling me is that your well-being, you want me to prioritize you over me, which no one will agree to. I'm like, okay. So if you don't want me to prioritize you over me, then we're both agreed that I'm not going, correct? Okay. right? You can hang out at a different time. What you're telling me is that your feelings are more important than mine? No, because no one's going to say that. But that's what you're saying when you say that, like, I want you to go, even though you stated multiple times that you don't want to go. We're out at an event and I said that I don't want to drink. And yet you keep asking me if I want alcohol. That's inappropriate, right? Like, what you're doing is showing somebody, you're not verbally saying, but you're showing someone that your well-being is more important than theirs. They should not prioritize themselves. They don't know what they need. You do. And like, we teach this with children, but I feel like people need to understand that with themselves too. Consent can be removed at any time. I said I wanted to go, never said I wanted to drink. I said I would come, didn't say I wanted to stay for an hour. I'm kind of fine with going to the meeting. I said I didn't want to speak on this topic. I'm not going to speak on it. Just being direct. I'm not raising my voice. I'm advocating for myself. It takes a lot of practice. A lot of times I do stuff even when my voice shakes. When I get really nervous, my voice shakes. I've had to do like academia presentations, all sorts of stuff, and my voice shakes. And the only thing that helped was like practice. That was it. Because not advocating for myself would make me feel gross and upset and sad. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to feel uncomfortable anyway, I might as well feel uncomfortable and get to say what I wanted to say. You know, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm not raising my voice. I did not put my hands on anyone. I'm not being aggressive. I'm asserting what I need. I'm being direct and I'm advocating for myself.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for talking us through those skills. And we are coming to the last 2 minutes of our time together, even though I could probably spend another 3 days or 3 years with you.
Yes.
I would love to have you leave us with any last thoughts, anything that you think that is important for folks as they leave this session. What do you think that you would like them to do and to take away from this session?
I would say the biggest thing is that like these kind of issues, these things, when it comes to like all the isms and prejudice and discrimination, like they impact all of us. They don't only impact the people who happen to be like the victims of it. And if you don't see yourself in that, I would ask myself why. Sometimes like some of the roots of a lot of issues are like the dehumanization of issues and dehumanization of people. It's not like racism isn't like a issue for people of the global majority. It's a human issue. All of us should be offended that people are being taken off of this earth by their own hands because they feel like there's no other way. All of us should be offended at the fact that a system that is meant to protect us are detrimentally and disproportionately hurting other people. All of us should be having an issue with that, just as human beings. So if you don't, I think I would start there. Like, don't feel the need to like, oh, I'm going to advocate for this because it's what I'm told to do. Think about like, why do you not feel the need to do it? What are you missing? Is it because you're not centered in this and you don't see it? Why do you feel like you have to be centered in something to think that it needs to be improved? I will always advocate for, prostate checks and cancer, stuff like that. And I do not have a prostate. I just care about people receiving the care that they need to receive. Because as a human, it impacts everyone. So I would start there. Sometimes people do things that they're like, everyone's doing. I feel like I should. But if you don't feel a desire to, if you don't feel like it impacts you, I would, why? What about it do you not see yourself in? We're human beings. If you think about it, I typically say ethnicity, but race, there's only one. I'm sure there are non-humans out here, but I don't even think they would stop at Earth for gas. Like, I legit think we are the planet that they are like, listen, we do not.
They still have some work to do.
We don't need gas. You do not go in that ozone. I hope you got the snacks. We're not stopping. I told you it was like a 2-year drive. We're not going. So I think there are other races out there. I don't think we'll get to meet them because we're
still working on ourselves.
We're the bad planet. We're the bad planet. Like last time I went there, the air, oh my gosh. Oh, awful.
We got some cool. We got some cool animals though.
Yeah. Well, we got them. Yeah.
as long as they're still alive. Exactly. It is 12:31.
Not a question, and I just put it in the chat, and I hope that that's okay.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Thank you. In the chat, let's see. There was Bernice. Thank you so much for a link. I will share that with an additional video. So she put that out in the chat for everyone. And we also do want to share all of Dr. Martin's socials. So if you want to continue on in this journey, feel free to do so. We also encourage you to come by the library when you can. We have some wonderful resources, these books in addition to other books, and a wonderful exhibit that's going to be going on all the way through March. So we encourage you to stop by if you physically can stop by. in the future in the library. And thank you for your time, for your energy, for your honesty, for all of these wonderful skills and resources. I hope that the folks who came found something that they could take away with and actually take some action on. But I had a ball. So we'll have to do this again somehow.
Thank you.
We'll have to do this again somehow. So thank you all, everyone. I'm going to stop our screen share for a moment. Again, thank you, LDIC, our Library Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Thank you, all of the committee members, Leah, Jen, Jenny, Jen Dandel, Jason, our transcriber, Latrice for starting this and keeping this going. And of course, Dr. Martin for all of your resources and your wonderful care for us this
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Martin, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Y'all have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Y'all have a great day.
Who's still here?
Let's see. Well, we've got a few participants that are leaving. Bye, everybody.